The sun rises first over the dark, turbulent waters of the Sibuyan Sea. It is Tuesday, October 24th, 1944. On the bridge of the Japanese super-battleship Musashi, officers scan the horizon through high-powered optics, waiting for the swarm of American aircraft they know is inevitable. Half a world away, in the freezing mud of the Netherlands, Canadian infantrymen check the actions of their rifles as cold rain sleets sideways across the bleak expanse of the Scheldt Estuary. High above the dense cloud layers of Europe, American bomber crews shiver in their sheepskin jackets, preparing to drop fire on the industrial heart of Germany. To the history books, this date is often treated as merely a transitional moment between major offensives. But for the millions of men and women mobilized across the globe, there is nothing ordinary about these 24 hours. This is the story of a single day where the machinery of total war operated at maximum capacity, stretching from the burning tropics to the frozen European front, locking millions in a synchronized dance of violence. By late October 1944, the global map reveals a deceptive image of the war's trajectory. To the casual observer, the Axis powers are visibly collapsing. In Europe, the Allies have liberated Paris and Brussels, pushing the Wehrmacht back to the very borders of the German Reich. In the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Navy has been stripped of its carrier aviation strength, and American forces have successfully pierced the inner defense ring of the Japanese Empire. The headlines in New York and London speak of inevitable victory, creating a sense that the war is winding down, that the soldiers will be home by Christmas. The reality on the ground, however, is far grimmer and more complex. The rapid Allied advance across France has ground to a halt, a victim of its own success. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's broad front strategy has stretched supply lines to their breaking point. The famous Red Ball Express, the truck convoys running supplies from Normandy beaches to the front, can no longer feed the insatiable hunger of the advancing armies. Fuel is scarce. Ammunition is rationed. The port of Antwerp has been captured, but the Scheldt Estuary leading to it remains firmly in German hands, rendering the port useless. Until those guns are silenced, the Allied war machine is effectively choking. On the German side, the chaotic retreat of the summer has stabilized into a hardened, fanatical defense. The West Wall, or Siegfried Line, is not just a line on a map, but a formidable network of bunkers and dragon's teeth that the Allies are now battering themselves against. The Battle of Aachen has just concluded with the city's surrender on October 21st, marking the first major German city to fall. But the cost was exorbitant. In the Hürtgen forest, American divisions are being fed into a meat grinder of tree bursts and hidden mines. The German High Command, rather than capitulating, is scraping the bottom of the manpower barrel, mobilizing old men and boys into the Volkssturm militia. The resistance is stiffening, driven by the desperate knowledge that the enemy is now on German soil. Half a world away, the Pacific theater faces a different kind of bottleneck. The debate between General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz over whether to bypass the Philippines for Formosa has been settled by President Roosevelt. The decision is made. The United States will return to the Philippines. This is not merely a strategic move to cut Japan's oil lines from the East Indies. It is a political necessity to liberate an American Commonwealth and redeem a national promise. On October 20th, 4 days prior to this Tuesday, the U.S. Sixth Army stormed the beaches of Leyte Island. The landings were successful, and MacArthur dramatically waded ashore, broadcasting his return. But the beachhead is fragile. The jungle terrain is unforgiving, and the monsoon rains have turned the ground into a quagmire. More dangerously, the Japanese have not reacted as they did in previous island campaigns. They have not simply dug in to die in caves. They have activated Shogo 1, Operation Victory. This is the global state of play as the sun rises on October 24th. It is a moment of maximum tension, where the momentum of the Allies collides with the desperate suicidal resolve of the Axis. The easy victories are gone. The war has entered a phase of attrition and total mobilization, where industrial output and a logistical mastery matter as much as bravery. In Washington, the War Department calculates tonnage of steel. In Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters calculates the sacrifice of blood. The stage is set not for a mop-up operation, but for the most violent synchronized clashes of the entire conflict. The strategic picture on October 24th is dominated by a massive hidden movement of naval power. The Japanese High Command knows that losing the Philippines means losing the war. It would sever the connection between the home islands and the oil-rich resource areas of the South. Therefore, they have committed the entirety of their remaining surface fleet to a complex high-stakes gamble. They have stripped their aircraft carriers of their few remaining planes to use them as bait, the Northern Force, intended to lure the American heavy carriers away from Leyte Gulf. Meanwhile, the real killing blow is intended to come from two other fleets, the Southern Force and the massive Center Force. The Center Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, is a juggernaut of surface warfare. It includes the Yamato and the Musashi, the two largest battleships ever constructed, armed with 18-inch guns capable of firing shells, weighing as much as a small car over 20 miles. This force is currently threading its way through the narrow, dangerous waters of the Philippines archipelago, aiming to burst into the Pacific and descend upon the vulnerable American transport ships unloading at Leyte. While the admirals plot course corrections on nautical charts, the war in the air has reached a relentless industrial tempo. The U.S. 8th Air Force, operating out of England, has evolved into a methodical machine of destruction. They are no longer just hunting factories, they are hunting the Luftwaffe itself. The strategy has shifted to attrition. By forcing the German fighters to engage the massive bomber streams, the Allies are bleeding the German pilot corps dry. On this Tuesday, the target lists are being finalized in briefing rooms across East Anglia. The objective is not just to destroy buildings, but to force the enemy into the sky where they can be destroyed. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army is pausing for breath after the colossal success of Operation Bagration, which shattered Army Group Center. But pause is a relative term. Along the Baltic coast and in Hungary, fierce local battles rage as the Soviets grind down pockets of resistance. Stalin is looking ahead to the Vistula-Oder offensive, moving armies of millions like chess pieces. The pressure on Germany is concentric. There is no safe direction, no quiet front. This Tuesday is unique because of the sheer density of operations. Usually, weather or logistics cause one theater to go quiet, while another flares up. But on October 24th, 1944, the weather clears over the Sibuyan Sea just as it remains flyable over Germany. The ground hardens enough for tanks in parts of the Western Front. It is a rare alignment of conditions that allows every major combatant to exert maximum force simultaneously. The intelligence war is also running hot. American submarines in the Palawan Passage have already drawn first blood the day before. sinking 2 Japanese cruisers and alerting Admiral Halsey to the approach of Kurita's fleet. The element of total surprise is lost, but the Japanese are committed. They are steaming directly into the teeth of the strongest navy the world has ever seen. The Americans, confident in their technology and numbers, are eager for the fight. Admiral Halsey, commanding the U.S. Third Fleet, is a man of aggressive instinct. He wants a surface battle. He wants to destroy the Japanese fleet once and for all. He is looking for a fight, and on this day he will get one of the largest in naval history. As the hours tick toward dawn in the Philippines, the crews of the Musashi paint the decks with a sticky, fire-retardant substance. They prepare for the end. In the cold damp of the Scheldt, Canadian soldiers fix bayonets. In the cockpits of P-51 Mustangs, pilots check their oxygen masks. The buildup is complete. The global machine is primed. The spark is about to be struck. High above the solid cloud deck that blankets Western Europe, the war is fought in a realm of sub-zero temperatures and thin air. At 25,000 feet, the crew of a B-17 Flying Fortress belonging to the U.S. 8th Air Force exists in a world entirely disconnected from the mud below. On this Tuesday morning, hundreds of these 4-engine giants are tracing white contrails across the blue sky, moving in tight, defensive box formations toward industrial targets in northwestern Germany. Inside the unpressurized aluminum fuselage, the temperature is 40 degrees below zero. The gunners are wrapped in heated flight suits, their breath frosting instantly on their oxygen masks. They scan the void for the glint of German interceptors. The Luftwaffe, though battered, is still lethal, launching attacks with Focke-Wulf 190s that slash through the formations with cannons blazing. For these American airmen, the war is a spasm of terrifying violence punctuated by hours of monotonous droning. They do not see the enemy's face. They see only machines and flak bursts, black smudges of death that appear silently outside the plexiglass. When a bomber is hit, it doesn't just fall, it disintegrates, spilling men and debris into the slipstream, a tragedy witnessed by hundreds but helped by no one. While the airmen fight in the stratosphere, the war in Italy has descended into a primitive, grinding stalemate. South of Bologna, along the Gothic Line, men of the U.S. Fifth Army and the British Eighth Army are living in conditions that resemble the worst of the First World War. The rapid advances of the summer are a distant memory. Here, the geography fights as hard as the Germans. The Apennine Mountains are a nightmare of steep ridges and deep valleys, now turned to slick, freezing mud by the autumn rains. For the infantryman on the Gothic Line, October 24th is defined by the heavy, sucking sound of boots pulling out of slime. Mules are more valuable than trucks here, ferrying ammunition up trails too narrow for jeeps. The German paratroopers digging into the reverse slopes are masters of defensive warfare, turning every stone farmhouse into a pillbox. The soldiers here call themselves the D-Day Dodgers, a sarcastic acknowledgement that the world's attention is fixed on France while they bleed for every yard of Italian rock. There is no sweeping maneuver today, just the dull boom of mortar fire echoing off the wet stone, and the constant struggle to keep feet dry and rifles clean. The contrast between the sterile high-tech war in the air and the animalistic struggle in Italy highlights the schizophrenia of the conflict on this date. In the sky, death is instant and mechanical. In the mountains, it is slow and exhausting. Yet both fronts share a common thread: the sheer scale of logistics required to keep them moving. Every shell fired in Italy, every gallon of high-octane fuel burned over Germany, traveled across the Atlantic, survive the U-boats, and move through a pipeline of supply that is currently clogging at the bottleneck of Antwerp. That logistical choke point, the port of Antwerp, is the focus of a brutal, largely forgotten war being fought by the 1st Canadian Army. On the banks of the Scheldt Estuary, the battlefield is neither solid ground nor open water, but a treacherous purgatory of flooded polders and mud flats. On October 24th, the Canadians are engaged in Operation Switchback and the drive toward Walcheren Island. They are not fighting for glory, they are fighting to open the shipping lanes. The soldiers here do not walk, they wade. They move in tracked amphibious vehicles called buffaloes, navigating grey, brackish water that conceals German mines. When the buffaloes hit a mine, they vanish in a geyser of mud and steel. When the infantry dismounts, they fight waist-deep in freezing water, assaulting German bunkers built atop dikes that loom over the flat landscape like medieval castles. It is a miserable, wet war of attrition where trench foot is as dangerous as shrapnel. The objective is simple but deadly: clear the banks so the supply ships can enter Antwerp. Until they succeed, the Allied armies in Germany remain starved of fuel. Half a world away, in the stifling heat of the Sibuyan Sea, a very different kind of tension grips the crew of the battleship Musashi. This massive vessel, the pride of the Imperial Navy, is a floating city of steel, displacing 72,000 tons. On her decks, thousands of sailors stand at battle stations, scanning the bright tropical sky. They know the Americans have spotted them. For the Japanese officers on the bridge, there is a fatalistic clarity to this mission. They are part of Vice Admiral Kurita's center force, steaming without air cover into the heart of American naval dominance. They are the bait and the hammer simultaneously. The mood is not one of panic, but of solemn preparation. Young sailors tie hachimaki headbands around their foreheads. Others hurriedly scribble final letters to families in rural Japan, tucking them into wooden boxes to be left behind or transferred. The ship's massive 18-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship, are elevated, ready to fire Sanshiki anti-aircraft shells, a desperate innovation that turns the main battery into a giant shotgun. There is a surreal stillness over the fleet. The water is calm, a glassy blue that betrays no sign of the violence below, where American submarines lurk. The Musashi cuts through the water with terrifying grace, a leviathan heading toward its own extinction. The waiting is the hardest part. The silence stretches, amplifying the hum of the turbines and the heartbeat of every man on board. Then at 10:27 a.m., the lookouts scream the warning that ends the silence forever. Enemy planes, port bow, the silence over the Sibuyan Sea shatters instantly. The spotters on the Musashi do not just see a few planes, they see the sky darkening. Swarms of American aircraft, SB-2C Helldivers, TBF Avengers, and F-6F Hellcats pour over the mountain ridges of the nearby islands like a plague of locusts. This is the hammer of Admiral Halsey's Task Force 38, unleashing its full fury. Vice Admiral Kurita orders the center force to increase speed to 24 knots and execute a frantic, zigzagging defensive maneuver. The fleet forms a massive ring of steel, with the destroyers and cruisers on the perimeter, and the twin giants, Yamato and Musashi, at the core. The Musashi trains her massive 18-inch turrets skyward. With a deafening roar that physically shakes the ocean surface, she fires her Type 3 Sanshiki shells. These are not solid armor-piercing rounds, but massive shotgun shells packed with incendiary tubes, designed to create a curtain of fire and shrapnel thousands of feet in the air. But the American pilots are veteran hunters. They ignore the pyrotechnic wall of fire. The helldivers tip over into near-vertical dives, engines screaming, aiming directly for the vast expanse of the Musashi's deck. Simultaneously, the TBF Avengers drop to wave-top height, approaching from multiple angles to split the anti-aircraft fire. They execute a textbook anvil attack, launching torpedoes from both port and starboard, giving the battleship nowhere to turn. At 10:29 a.m., the first torpedo slams into the Musashi's starboard side. The explosion sends a shockwave through the 72,000-ton hull, whipping men off their feet. Moments later, a bomb punched through the deck armor. This is not a skirmish. It is an execution. The Musashi, built to be unsinkable, is absorbing punishment that would vaporize a lesser ship. But the Americans are not stopping. As the first wave pulls out, the drone of engines signals a second wave, then a third. The air is thick with smoke, burning oil, and the relentless traces of 25mm machine guns that are rapidly overheating. The unsinkable fortress is beginning to list. The punishment continues for 5 relentless hours. By mid-afternoon, the Musashi has absorbed 19 torpedoes and 17 heavy bombs. No ship in history has ever withstood such concentrated violence. The bridge is a chaotic ruin of shattered glass and shouting officers. The bow is so heavy with seawater that the ship is plowing through the ocean rather than riding over it, her speed dropping from 27 knots to a crawling 6. Inside the hull, the damage control teams are fighting a losing battle against the rising Pacific. They counter-flood compartments to correct the list, drowning their own machinery to keep the guns level. But the water is winning. The castle of iron is dying. While the Musashi absorbs the blows, the Japanese land a singular, devastating counterstrike. A lone Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber slips through the American radar net undetected. It drops a single 550-pound bomb onto the flight deck of the light carrier USS Princeton. The bomb penetrates deep into the hangar deck, igniting fueled Avengers and a stockpile of torpedoes. The resulting chain reaction blows the ship's elevator platform hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion is so violent it kills hundreds of sailors on the nearby cruiser USS Birmingham, which had come alongside to help fight the fire. The Princeton becomes a floating pyre, a grim reminder that the U.S. Navy is not invincible. Back in the Sibuyan Sea, Vice Admiral Kurita makes a critical decision. Watching the Musashi sink and his other heavy cruisers taking fire, he orders the center force to reverse course at 1600 hours. He turns his ships west, away from Leyte Gulf. To the American pilots overhead, it looks like a full retreat. They radio back to Admiral Halsey. The enemy is fleeing. Halsey, aggressive and eager, bites. He believes the center force is broken. When his scout planes spot the Japanese northern force far to the north, he makes the most controversial decision of the Pacific War. He decides to abandon the San Bernardino Strait, the gateway to the invasion beaches, and take his entire fleet north to chase the carriers. He leaves the landing forces at Leyte completely unguarded. As the sun begins to set, the Musashi is alone. Kurita has turned back around to resume his attack in the dark, leaving his dying sister ship Berlin. At 7:36 p.m., the inevitable physics of flooding take over. The giant battleship lurches to port. The men on deck slide into the oil-slicked water. With a groan of twisting steel that can be heard for miles, the Musashi capsizes and plunges toward the bottom of the Sibuyan Sea, taking over 1,000 of her crew with her. The water churns violently, then settles. The sun has set on October 24th, but the trap has been sprung. As darkness reclaims the Sibuyan Sea, The true cost of the day begins to clarify. The sinking of the Musashi is a cataclysmic event for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Not just a loss of tonnage, but a shattering of national mythology. 1,023 sailors go down with the ship, including her captain, Rear Admiral Toshihiro Inaguchi, who chose to lash himself to the bridge rather than abandon his command. For the survivors bobbing in the oil-soaked swell, the war has reduced them to mere flotsam, waiting for rescue that may never come. On the American side, the loss of the USS Princeton is a strategic blow, but the human tragedy aboard the USS Birmingham is far more visceral. When the Princeton exploded, the Birmingham's decks were crowded with fire control parties and medical teams. The blast transformed the cruiser's topside into a charnel house. Over 230 men were killed instantly. Their bodies swept into the sea by the pressure hoses used to clean the blood from the scuppers. It is one of the grim ironies of the day. The winning side has suffered a massacre in the process of saving their own. In Europe, the telegraph lines begin to hum with the day's butcher's bill. In the Scheldt Estuary, the Canadian 2nd Division has advanced only a few hundred yards at the cost of hundreds of casualties. The Black Watch Regiment has been decimated, assaulting the dikes. There is no triumphant breakthrough here, only the tedious, heartbreaking work of counting the dead in the freezing mud. The supply lines to Antwerp remain closed. At air bases across East Anglia, the B-17s and B-24s of the 8th Air Force sputter to a halt on the tarmac. Ground crews rush out, not just to refuel, but to hose out the interiors of the fuselages. Ambulances race to the flight lines to collect the wounded gunners who have bled out in the freezing high altitude. The mess halls that night are quieter than usual. The empty chairs at the tables are the only metric that matters to the men who survived. The raid is deemed a success by high command. But for the crews, survival is the only victory. The sinking of the Musashi and the carnage in the Scheldt are tragic, but the most profound consequence of October 24th is a mistake that occurs in the silence of the map rooms. In the dim red light of the Third Fleet's flag bridge, Admiral Halsey studies the reports. He sees the destruction of the Musashi and the retreat of the Japanese center force. He concludes that Kurita's fleet is a broken weapon, no longer a threat to the invasion beaches. He turns his eyes north, toward the contacts reported by his scouts, the Japanese aircraft carriers. Halsey does not know that these carriers are empty shells, devoid of planes, sent specifically to seduce him. Driven by the instinct of a hunter, he issues the order that will become the subject of Naval War College debates for a century. The entire Third Fleet, battleships, carriers, and cruisers, turns north at high speed. He leaves the San Bernardino Strait completely unguarded. He does not leave a single destroyer behind as a picket. He takes the shield away from the invasion force, believing the enemy sword is already shattered. But in the darkness of the Sibuyan Sea, the shattered enemy is moving with cold purpose. Vice Admiral Kurita has reversed course again. His battered but still lethal center force, led by the super-battleship Yamato, slips into the San Bernardino Strait. They expect a trap. They expect to fight their way through the American heavy fleet. Instead, they find the ocean empty. They sail through the choke point unopposed, their guns loaded, their radar sweeping a clear horizon. By midnight, the pieces are set for a catastrophe. The American transport ships and escort carriers off Samar are sleeping under the false security of Halsey's protection. They are unaware that the Bull has charged the red cape of the decoy fleet, leaving the gate to the sheep pen wide open. The 24 hours of October 24th have not resolved the battle. They have merely wound the spring of tension to its breaking point. The sun has set on a day of slaughter, only to rise on a morning of desperate survival. To the military historian, October 24th, 1944 is a footnote, a date of movement rather than resolution. It is recorded as the prelude to the Battle of Samar, or a day of continued pressure on the Western Front. In the grand timeline of the Second World War, it is simply one Tuesday among thousands. A day when the lines on the map barely moved, and the ultimate outcome of the war remained unchanged. But war is not lived in timelines. It is lived in moments. For the sailors of the Musashi, this Tuesday was the end of the world. The sinking of their castle of iron signaled the death of an era, proving that no amount of armor could withstand the advancing tide of aerial technology. The age of the battleship ended not with a treaty, but with a torrent of torpedoes in the Sibuyan Sea. For the soldiers in the Scheldt and the pilots over Germany, the day offered no such historical clarity. It offered only the binary reality of survival. There was no glory in the mud of the Netherlands, nor in the freezing fuselage of a B-17, only the mechanical repetition of duty. The average day in a total war is a myth, for the thousands who died in the sinking ships or the flooded fields. This Tuesday was the most significant day in history. As the clocks tick past midnight, resetting the calendar to October 27th, the global machine does not pause. The engines of the Third Fleet roar in the darkness, racing north toward a phantom enemy. The artillery in Italy reloads. The telegrams expressing regret are typed, folded, and sent. The world has survived one 24-hour cycle of industrial violence, only to immediately begin the next. History may forget the specific date, but the ghosts of the Sibuyan Sea and the Scheldt Estuary remain silent witnesses to a day that was anything but average.